Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 155 of the Chronological Read Through the Bible. Today's reading and commentary covers an entire book of the Bible, and that is none other than the Song of Solomon, or in some cases known as the Song of Songs. Now, Solomon is credited, and I wanted to read this passage out of 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 32. It says, "He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. So Solomon is credited for having written quite an amount, but not all is recorded in the scripture. But this portion is. Now, I know this is a controversial, in many ways, book of the Bible. One oftentimes overlooked, one oftentimes misquoted, and oftentimes quoted with a carnal mind rather than being quoted from a biblical mindset. I'm going to really touch more on a part of what the story really is unfolding, because we can miss that if we're just going through the portions of the scripture. But I do need to address one part that sometimes is also overlooked, and that is, this is one book of the Bible which Christ never quoted from. And for that reason, some of the Bible scholars of old, not really as much of those of modern times, but of older times, questioned whether this book should be canonized, whether it should be in the scriptures or not. I do believe that it's fitting, though, for it to be here. And let's just look at a few of these reasons why. So, I want to say just the rough outline. The rough outline really is broken into three sections. So, it's the king courts his bride, the king claims his bride, and then the king communes with his bride. Those are kind of seen as the three main divisions here. But we also have three specific characters that are found in this book. So it's a love story, and here's the three characters. So there's the character of the lovely maiden, and we have this picture early on that she is forced into labor for her family, or her family forces her to go into the field to take care of the flocks. And she later addresses this in speaking of that, but my skin is darkened from her having to go out and work in the field. Not really the choice maiden would have been somebody kind of kept back, and that they wouldn't have been exposed to the harsh sunlight, but yet she has been forced into this light. And we have that picture, but then we have her beloved. Undoubtedly, we kind of have this picture that he's a neighbor lad who's also out tending the flocks. And so he's out with his sheep, and she's out with her sheep, and they're longing for each other across the valley. And then we have King Solomon as the next character, who's known for his attraction to beautiful women, and he decides he wants her for himself. It's while on one of his trips to examine his lands, Solomon meets the lovely maiden and takes her to his palace. But while she's there, she can only think of her beloved, the one that has really she's been taken away from him, kidnapped, if you will, in a sense. So as she thinks of her beloved, she tells the other women in the harem of the king, the other daughters of Jerusalem, she tells them about her beloved, the one that she longs for. And not trying to persuade her to forsake her true love, she recalls and tells of her beloved. And she even dreams about him. And Solomon visits her and tries to win her love over, but she can't forget her love that's back home. And her beloved, she sees him in this dream again and again, and finally her true love wins out, and the maiden is set free, and she flees to her beloved and is restored to her family again. Now, there's different interpretations given to this, but this is a sense of the biblical or the spiritual aspect is that, in a sense, even though Solomon's the one writing this, it's like the world takes this maiden away from the life that she would have had, that would have been this glorious, picture perfect life. But in the end, she keeps fighting against the world, which Solomon represents, and is able to return to her beloved. It's that aspect of that we have this laid out for us in Scripture of the verses that speaks of, I am my beloved and he is mine, and his banner over me is love. Is love. Some of you will be familiar with that Christian song. You know, there's so many different ways that this is looked at, and I realize, as I say, it's a bit of a controversial passage. Maybe some have tuned in today just to see how will he cover this. But the Song of Solomon is quite beautiful, but it must be taken with the spiritual mind, and it must be taken with the mature mind. It really is not a book of the Bible for the immature, because they will look at this from a very corrupt, worldly influence perspective, rather than seeing the aspects of Christ in it. The practical meaning of the book presents itself as a vivid picture of faithful love, which depicts communion. In its intimate terms, really describes the wonderful love between Christ and the Christian. And we must note that there's this underlying aspect here of salvation. We are married with Christ, as Romans chapter 7 verse 4 speaks of. It's dedication. We're dedicated to the Lord. Bodies not our own, but belonging to each other, to Christ, and they have that picture in them. We think of Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, where we're to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to the Lord, which says this is your spiritual worship. This is the way that we worship God. And as I say, there's the communion which takes place. Interesting enough, this psalm, or portions of this psalm, or portions of this book, was read out during the Feast of Passover. It's just interesting for us to note that and see that in history. And then there's the glory, the final glory which takes place. You know, for the Christian, you are a bridegroom of Christ, and or we're the bride and he's the bridegroom, I should say. But the marriage hasn't taken place yet. On that great day after the day of judgment, there will be then the great wedding banquet which will take place, when the bride and the groom will be finally united. You know, we've not seen the face of the groom yet. We don't know what he looks like in that sense. I realize this is sort of the allegorical aspects that the Bible unfolds and speaks of, because it speaks of our relationship with Christ as being that marriage relationship. You have to take this with the understanding of it being an allegorical story. And that, in a sense, is what Solomon writes out. You may remember, though, I did address before the Shunammite woman, which is spoken of, is possibly the maiden which was brought to keep King David warm in his old age. And the scriptures clearly spelled out that there was no sexual relationship that took place between David and the Shunammite woman. And then we'll also remember that Solomon's brother wanted to have this woman for his bride, and that was actually a part of what ended up with his death, was because he in a sense, was kind of being a little conniving, it would seem, thinking that if I could take this woman that had laid, well, again, not sexually, but kept the king warm in his old age, that maybe that would be a potential pathway for him to take the throne, to take it away from Solomon. So we have that kind of underlying picture taking place with that as well. But it's then believed that in the Song of Solomon, it's being revealed that that was the woman of his dreams in many ways. And yet, she wanted to return to her homeland. She wanted to return to her true love that she had been taken away from in order to come to the king's palace to keep King David warm. It's just an underlying theme here of a possible sort of way of looking at this. But brothers and sisters, I do hope that as you read through this, that you do so with a mature mind and a sober mind, and consider the love that is being spoken of here, and what a proper love would look like as well. Well, I do hope that your day's going well. Until tomorrow, God bless.